Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber, and thanks for joining us here on the network, where we cover the most interesting live trials and legal stories in the news today. We have a lot to cover on this Monday morning. You're joining us at a great time, so let's get started. We are the Law and Crime Network, and how could we not talk about the absolutely shocking development over the weekend in the Jeffrey Epstein case? Now, Epstein is that famous financier who was accused of sex trafficking minors and facing significant prison time if convicted. He was found dead inside of his Manhattan jail cell on Saturday morning. This shocked everyone. Now, while the matter is currently under investigation, and the coroner here in New York is confident that this was a suicide by Epstein in hanging himself, we still have some questions, and we want to dig into this further. And let's just go to the beginning, when the Miami Herald basically exposed Epstein in their expose. And let me tell you, this is what started the snowball effect, that just everybody had questions into what was going on with Epstein and the deal that he took 10 years ago. So let's go back to that expose on this really infamous case.
We were little girls.
I was 16.
I was 16.
I started going to him when I was like 14 turning 15.
If you think at 14, $200, that's a lot of money at 14 years old. I mean, that's a lot of money now.
She's like, oh, do you need to make any extra money? I'm like, yeah. She's like, okay, I can give you, like $200. There's this older guy in Palm Beach. He gets a lot of massages from girls. That was really.
They were recruited by someone who was adept at finding girls that would be willing to, go to a house for a few $100s, and as it started out, give a man a back rub, but many cases it turned into something far worse than that, elevated to a crime, and a serious crime, in some cases sexual batteries.
My life would have been different if I would have never went to Jeffrey Epstein's house. It was just a dark turning point in my life.
On June 30th, 2008, Jeffrey Epstein, a Palm Beach multimillionaire hedge fund manager, received what might have been the most lenient plea deal for a serial sex offender in U.S. history. The Miami Herald identified over 60 of his victims, just young middle and high school girls at the time of the abuse. More than a decade later, several of them are talking for the first time about how they were molested by Epstein and believe they were betrayed by the very prosecutors who were supposed to hold Epstein accountable.
We're going to get into exactly what happened over the weekend, but before we do, I want to bring in trial attorney Ann Bremner to talk about those victims. They were meant to testify, Ann. They were going to have their day in court. That's not going to happen now, because he just by all accounts, he appeared to have killed himself. So the question, of course, is what happens to their accounts? What happens to their case? What happens to the people who wanted to come forward and explain what was happening?
Well, like the Miami Herald said, Jesse, it's like he took the easy way out. That's the big headline. But they basically just transfer the case into lawsuits against the estate. So are they going to have their day in court against Epstein? No. And a lot of the voiced complete dismay and disdain for him for taking the easy way out, because they wanted the justice of having him held accountable in a court of law. And now it's just going to be his estate. But there's still money there. There was no seizure, of course, by the government of the most expensive townhouse or home in Manhattan, because he died first. And we know that there's precedent for not having a forfeiture after death in the Enron case with Kenneth Lay. So, basically, there's going to be a freezing of assets at the request of lawyers, and then the various victims can continue against his estate.
And, people are disappointed, obviously, about what happened over the weekend. And, you have to imagine that maybe one of those people is Jeffrey Berman, who's the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York. You'll recall back on July 8th, he held a press conference where he talked about the charges levied against Mr. Epstein and what their case was and why this case was so important to go forward. Let's go back to July 8th.
This conduct, as alleged, went on for years, and it involved dozens of young girls, some as young as 14 years old at the time that they were allegedly abused. As alleged, Epstein was well aware that many of his victims were minors, and not surprisingly, many of the underage girls that Epstein allegedly victimized were particularly vulnerable to exploitation. The alleged behavior shocks the conscience. And while the charged conduct is from a number of years ago, it is still profoundly important to the many alleged victims, now young women. They deserve their day in court, and we are proud to be standing up for them by bringing this indictment. Combating sex trafficking and exploitation of children is a priority for this office and for the Department of Justice, as the sexual abuse of a minor can have devastating effects on victims, often lasting for years. That is why my office will not rest until perpetrators of these types of crimes are brought to justice. Victims' voices, including the many voices of Epstein's alleged victims, must be heard.
Now, Ann, you had mentioned earlier that he took the easy way out. Still being investigated, all signs are pointing to suicide. Does that mean you don't believe any of the conspiracy theories that the Clintons had him killed, that President Trump had him killed, that Attorney General William Barr visited his jail cell and had him killed? I mean, there's a lot of theories out there. Some people don't believe he killed himself. What do you say to them?
Right. I mean, you got like the vast left wing and the vast right wing conspiracy theories. I mean, even my mother, I talked to her yesterday, thinks that somebody killed him, or at least a psychiatrist has a big fat bank account for basically saying, you know, going with the idea that he's not going to be a suicide risk. But, the fact of the matter is all the facts point to a suicide. He tried it before. He was alone in his cell. He was not on suicide watch, and there's no indication.
Well, I just want to. Did he try it before? I thought he tried it before because his attorneys, they could have come forward and said, "Look, he's been attacked in prison. Look what's happening." But they didn't say that when that incident happened a couple of weeks ago, that he was found unconscious, which seemed to suggest to me he did try to do this at an earlier point.
Exactly. And I saw a quote, and I don't know if it's true or not, but I saw that his attorneys had asked to take him off suicide watch this time around, basically saying they wanted more access to him, and it was too difficult to see him when he was in more protective custody. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but they were spending purportedly like 12 hours a day with him. But the bottom line is he wasn't on suicide watch, apparently, at that time, and he was by himself. I don't know where his cellmate was. He was supposed to have a cellmate. They had certain precautions in place nevertheless, and then he kills himself. I couldn't believe it when I saw the headline. I'm sure you're the same way, like, oh my gosh, I cannot believe, he killed himself. But there it is.
It was shocking. It was shocking. I guess the point of it is for people who didn't believe that he did this, is this a sign that he was guilty? Is this a sign of somebody who either felt that he was guilty of everything he was charged with, there was no way he could beat the case, or he just wanted to spare himself from the humiliation and he felt, look, I am innocent, but I didn't want to go through it. I didn't want to go through the trial. There's a good chance I would have been found guilty. I mean, how should we be taking this exactly in terms of what he did or accused of doing?
He had everything to live for, and he had nothing to live for. And if he's humiliated by these types of accusations, he lived them for decades. And he did it brazenly and openly and notoriously, as they would say, in a way that he wasn't ashamed about it at all. I mean, he was basically leading a pyramid scheme of sex trafficking with young girls. So you have to look at it. Probably an admission. He just couldn't go on. Although one thing that really got me is he doesn't seem to have the kind of ego of a person who would kill themselves. He seems to be, so kind of brazen, that word keeps coming up for me, at least with him, that you wonder, really? Would he really kill himself? Right. Or does he want to spare other people? I doubt that too. I don't think he's altruistic.
I think it would have been.
In any event, he did it.
Well, it would have been interesting to see what would have happened if he was not. His bail wasn't denied and he wasn't in jail and he was at home. What would have happened? That would have been an interesting situation. And we do have to jump into a break. Maybe we'll have an opportunity to talk about this a little bit later on. When we come back, we're going to focus on our main live trials of the day. Big day here on the network. Stay tuned. We'll be right back.